Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, everyone. I am Aisha Wu. I am the Communications Officer for the Alberta Land Institute, and this is the first webinar in our lunchtime webinar series for this year. We did some last year, and we're going to start up again, so keep an eye out for those. The Institute aims to connect research and policy for better land management on Alberta's changing landscape. So the goal of these webinars is to encourage knowledge sharing and discussion about a variety of land use topics relevant to Alberta and beyond. When speaking about land use, it's important to acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. I'm going to pass it off to today's moderator, Dave Poulton. Dave is the Senior Advisor at the Alberta Land Institute. He is a researcher and consultant focusing on conservation policy and is currently a PhD candidate at the School of the Environment at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia, with his research focusing on federal Canadian perceptions of mitigation options in project development. So go ahead and take it away, Dave.
Thanks, Aisha. Today's webinar will focus on forest management and changing climate, an issue that will affect much of Alberta, both ecologically and economically. There are a number of ways our forests are impacted by climate change, and today we have two presentations from experts in the field. Fangliang He is a professor here at the University of Alberta in the Department of Renewable Resources, Canada Research Chair in Biodiversity and Landscape Modeling, and an ecologist and statistician by training. He received his PhD from the University of Montreal 30 years ago and a master's in statistics from the University of Victoria. Before joining U of A in 2003, he was a research scientist at Canadian Forest Service in Victoria, BC. He loves to crunch numbers, including counting how many trees and species, dead or alive, in our landscapes. In 2023, he received funding from the ALI for research focused on modeling and mapping tree biomass in Alberta's boreal forests to quantify the carbon sink potential of the forest. Fangliang's presentation today will be forest carbon sink potential, how many trees are there in Alberta's boreal forest. My apologies for stumbling over that.
No, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Aisha, for the opportunity. So, okay, let me share my screen for the presentation. Let's see. Okay.
Perhaps while you're getting going there, Fangliang, I can just ask people if they've got questions as you go. Maybe they can put them in the chat, and Aisha and I will compile them, and we'll deal with them at the end in the Q&A session. With that, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. So I will take the next 15 minutes to talk about how we may quantify carbon sink potential for Alberta boreal forest. Basically, what I would like to know is where those carbon distribute and how much they. So before that, I would like to put this talk in a broader context. So just quickly showing you where are this carbon, biomass distribute across those different species taxonomic groups. So you look, this is a work published in 2018. So if you look where the biomass, the carbon distribute plant, that's of course include the trees, the grassland, and wetland plant. All plant account for about 450 billion tons. So the rest, like a bacteria, the second largest. What interesting, I would like to point out, this is the animal part, the animal. All those animal, terrestrial land animal or marine aquatic animals. So animal, if you look like humans, compare, this is a particularly interesting, means that look at humans. Humans today, we have a human population on the planet about, a bit over 8 billion. So our biomass altogether is much, much large, about one order magnitude larger than wild mammals. Can you imagine? So that's why human can have a very profound substantial impact on the environment. So this is a distribution across the species. Now, as we know, the plant, but the plant forest is really the most important part, which account for between 80 or 90% of land biomass. So you can see the importance of a forest. The forest also play a very important role by sequestering 25-30% of anthropogenic carbon that human activity generates. Now, in the context of Alberta, so Alberta, we know we have roughly about 40 million hectares of boreal forest. So that's take up about 60% of land base on Alberta, and the 15% of Canadians boreal forest. The Canadian forest is about 360 million hectares. Of that, 270 million boreal forest. So boreal forest is really play very, very important role, not in ecologically, but also in economy. So now the question here is, across the vast boreal forest, where those carbon are located, where those biomass locate. That's a question, we know roughly where they distribute, but there's a lot of uncertainty here. And so this is the base of the question here. So where the carbon distribute, so where are the carbon hot spot, and where are the cold spot? For example, but this is some of the preliminary result. We identify the Rockies. This area has the highest carbon density compared to the far north, and also where there's the carbon distributed across different DBH classes. Now, this is the issue very important, because the data we have so far, we only, our attention mainly focus on larger trees, not those small trees. In most data, we only collect trees with the DBH larger than 10 centimeters. So what happened to those trees smaller than 10 centimeters? We know tree density and the size had a very well-established relationship. So larger trees, the density is low. Small trees, the density is high. So now we focus on only those larger trees. But yes, larger trees, for individual tree, the biomass is high, there's a lot of carbon there. But the number of the density, the number of larger trees is much smaller than the number of small trees. So it's also important to take account of those small trees. So this is something we are looking at as well. So all this together, we want to get the answer how much potential does Alberta forest have enhancing carbon sink the capacity. So to look at that issue, we look the processes. What are those processes contribute to carbon sink potential, the capacity? So we break down, look at those processes, the three major critical, the fundamental process, basically like growth, mortality, and the recruitment. The three demographic rates, those processes that determine the density. Density based on how many trees there, and the size, and also the height. So density, the size, the height, those three elements come together to determine the dynamic of a carbon sink of the carbon, in a forest. So let's look at density. This is something that the focus of today. So density, so first we collect data. So our data come from two parts. One is the permanent sampling plot. This is the PSP plot. That's the provincial government across Canada. Industry company, they maintain those long-term forest inventory plots. This plot, the network that started from 1960s, is really a very unique, unprecedented long-term data. And every couple of years, they went back to resurvey the plot. We also, this is one part. The other part, we also have all the ground data. So this is an example. This plot is in George Lake, not far from Edmonton, about 1 hour drive from Edmonton. This summer, to August and September or last, we went back. We took 3 weeks to research it. It's a 1 hectare plot. This plot is very unique. So we locate every single tree, every single individual with a diameter larger than 1 centimeter. So that plot was established 2010. We had a second census in 2015. Now, just after 10 years, 2020, now we went back to recense the plot. Now, on the ground, you see a lot of change, a lot of mortality, and a lot of recruitments. So this plot together with the PSP and even with the ABMI and others, so we want to look, how biomass change over time. So now get to the focus of today's the talk. I want to estimate how many trees in Alberta. In Canada, actually, my question is how many trees in North America? That's included Alaska and Canada. Okay, so this idea, actually, I had the idea way before this work was published. So because my own interest, I'm interested in biodiversity. So for biodiversity, we are interested to know how many species in the world. So about 20 years ago, I said, I told my students, I know I'm not interested in how many species in the world. I was interested in knowing how many trees in the world. But anyway, so another group that published this work. Now, the work is about a global distribution of trees, but of that, there is part of the auto look at boreal forest. So they build a model. They estimate there are 211 billion trees in the boreal forest, not only in North America boreal and also Russian and Scandinavian. Now you can see the model. Well, this is the model they built, and it shows. Well, if the model works well, then all the dot should lie on this diagonal line. But you see here, they do not really lie, not even close. So there is much uncertainty here. That make us to think. So okay, we want to test how accurate this estimation is. Okay, now to build the model, they use all sorts of those variables, including topographic variable, climatic, and vegetative variables. Should also include human disturbances. Now, among all those variables, there is a very, very important variable. It's why that make the estimations saying not good. So it's a pool estimation. The key variable is the height, tree height. Tree height. Why we bring in tree height here? Because tree height, very important. We have global data, tree height canopy data that use remote sensing, so that the data is available, the global tree height data. So tree height, we know tree height is very closely related to diameter. Diameter, tree, how large a tree, how big a tree is, that determine the competition. So competition regulate standard density. Because the availability of the global tree height, so we want to use the tree height to predict, to model standard density. So you look, tree height, we bring in tree height, and of course we also use larger data. The original publication that work published in 2015, they only use 460 plot from NIF, National Inventory, Forest Inventory Network. That's to say the network maintained by Canadian Forest Service. So only 360 plot for entire North America. That is a small number. So we compile the data from PSP, from NFI, and also from ABMI. So we were able to compile this over 4,000 plot to look, and we also collect the same set of variable of that 2015 publications, but we include tree height. We add one more variables. I not go to the detail of those models, but the main method we use is a machine learning method, random forest. Here I just want to quickly show you the model. So this panel shows the observed versus the machine learning random forest algorithm, that the method. So you can see the prediction for very close to this diagonal line. If the model is perfect, so all those 4,000 plot data should nicely line up on this line, but very close compared to the original. This is the original. That's 360 plot, and use the model. So there's no comparison. This accuracy is much high. This basically, predict and then versus the actual observed density. This is very little correlation. So based on this model, of course, the model will also identify the importance of different variables. The tree height stand up as the most important predictors. So that's a significant increase the prediction. So this is the predict map. This map is based on the 4,000 plot PSP, NFI, and ABMI for Alberta, ABMI data, the 3,000 plot, and we interpolate, produce the map. So you can see most of the map, of course, distributed around the south border, and it decreases with the latitude. But within each province, each region, there's still a lot of variations. So how many trees in North America, in Canada, in Alberta? So now I need to explain. The tree here, we talk about tree here, we only talk about the tree with the diameter larger than 10 centimeters. We do not include trees smaller than that, all right? So there are 277 billion trees across entire North America, that Canada plus Alaska. And for Canada alone, we have 240 billion trees. If we break it down into each provinces, and Alaska, now Alberta, we have 788. This is a million, well, per hectare, sorry. There's a per hectare trees. Okay, in terms of billion trees, that's 30 billion trees for Alberta. So for Alberta, if we count the population, each person we have 6,000 trees per person across the Alberta. Now, we also predict what's going to happen, in 30 years. So we project the density change under the three climate change scenario. So there's a shared socioeconomic pathways. So across the three, we found minimum. The density increase in general increases. Okay, but of course, some area, even though in general the density increase due to increase of the temperature due to warming, but some areas, particularly in Ontario, regardless under which scenario, the density decreases. So those three panels shows the change of the density. But in the north, in the other areas, the density increases. So overall, you will see at least like a 11% of increase in density. Okay. Now, what the implication? So we know Canada, the federal government, had a plan to plant 2 billion trees over the 10 years from 2020 to 2030. So how much of those 2 billion trees I count? But the total number of buried trees, so that is another 1%. Another 1%. Now, if we add other forests, like temporary forest, this number would be even much low. We know, I don't know how many trees in like a temperate forest, but we can roughly have some idea, can give a ballpark estimation. Because Canadian buried forest is about 207 billion, but temperate forest about 1 million hectares. So altogether about 360 million hectares. So we add like 40%. The buried forest take 60% of land cover, another 30% is the temperate forest. So if we add that, then 2 billion trees over all the trees in the forest, it's smaller than less than 0.5%. So that speaks for the challenge of like a planting used as a nature-based climate solution. Well, that helps, but really not much. So that is what my message. Forest, not conservation, it's really hold the hope for natural climate solutions. Now, before I close, I would like to very quickly show you this slide. So this is very much a work in progress. The next things we actually right now doing is estimate the number of trees smaller than 10 centimeters. So we build a model, like this Weibull distribution. We have data. This is data from Alberta by 2020. From that, we can extrapolate back to estimate how many trees smaller than 10 centimeters. And this is the missing biomass. So we get an idea how much this biomass we should add into Alberta, forest biomass. Now, this part is very important. Small trees, they grow fast. They also have a very high mortality rate. It means the carbon turnover is much higher than larger trees. So it's particularly important to understand the dynamic for the carbon in small trees. So next, another work that's also working in progress, we're modeling the tree height potential. How much taller our tree can grow, or how shorter they can grow. So here too, I want to wrap up to thank the funding. I acknowledge the support from Alberta Land Institute. I appreciate that. Really grateful to have that support and also answer. So thank you.
Thank you, Fangliang. Very interesting. And just to clarify for people that aren't familiar with forestry terminology, I think DBH is diameter breast height, right?
That's right. About 1.3 meter above ground. That's just roughly at the breast height. So
right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll turn to our second presentation then. We have Andreas Hamann, Professor and Director of Academics and Communications in the Department of Renewable Resources here at the University of Alberta. He holds an MSc from the State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and a PhD from the University of British Columbia. His research focuses on global change biology and the ecological genetics of forest trees. And Andreas is also a recipient of an Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship and an August Wilhelm Scheer Professorship for Collaborative Research in Germany, a Fulbright Fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley, and the Sir Frederick McMaster Fellowship for Research with CSIRO in Canberra. Andreas will be discussing his research into how reliably reforestation can address climate change through the use of climate-adapted species and seed sources. Okay, and so I'll hand it off to you, Andreas, but with just a reminder again to everyone that if questions occur to you as we're going through for either Andreas or Fangliang, please put them in the chat, and we will harvest them and air them once we get into the Q&A session upon a little bit later. Andreas, over to you.
Very good. Thank you. I am going to share my screen here as well. And I hope this is visible nicely. Otherwise, yell at me.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Good. I'm talking about climate-informed reforestation data and models for decision support. I do want to, even though I give that talk, I do want to acknowledge my students who did all their work over the last 2 years. And I just to give a connection to Fang, I think his last point that that there's, if you want to fix anything by planting trees, that's a tall order. So you can only have a relatively small impact on the landscape. But maybe if your benchmark is not all of Canadian forests, but commercially important forests where people operate, I think you can probably turn over 1 to 3% of the landscape every year as part of normal reforestation programs, depending on how intensive they are. And that also doesn't come at any additional cost. So these are reforestation practices that we have to do anyway if we harvest. And in that case, we might as well plant species that are well adapted for future conditions. So it's basically just an intellectual exercise to figure out which species and which seed sources should we plant in order to have our forests reasonably future-proof. And so that usually involves some sort of movement of seeds. So the standard is that you collect from seeds nearby, or you have local tree improvement programs and seed orchards where you get your seed. But as climate warms, we have to basically get that material from seed orchards further south in warmer areas, or we have to collect further south and move them into the correct habitats. And so there are two general approaches to do this. One is with these kind of test and plantations that you see here. So what people do is they collect provenances, that's what we call them, so seed sources from all over the distribution. That's a lodgepole pine collection here, and then you test them at different sites and you see how they do. And from that you can, for each source, you can build response functions, how they respond to climate environment, what's their optimal temperature and precipitation regimes. And from there you can infer where you should collect to grow enough to grow so that seed planting stock will grow well under projected future climates. The other approach that you can use, and that's actually also an interesting and valid and easier and quicker approach, but that's just as important, is just climate matching. So we don't really worry about where the species or how the species grow. We don't have long-term tests or observations from permanent sample plots or something like that. We just infer from how the species is distributed, where it might go in the future. So if the climate niche that we observed in the past is shifting in the landscape, then we could consider moving the species beyond its leading edge. We can also migrate within the species range. So something from a mid position might go to a little bit further north. And you might want to be careful at the lagging edge or the trailing edge of the distribution. So it is not necessarily cause for alarm that everything will die there. This is one of the assumptions that is often misinterpreted. So this does not necessarily mean that the species disappears beyond its fundamental limits, but chances are it's not going to grow that well. There may be other options, other species that may be more appropriate for those environments. So there are tools that are already available. So for Canada, by the Canadian government, that would allow you to either based on growth or based on climate match, tell you which seed sources you should consider. The US has this as well. And so we are not proposing anything brand new. It's actually interesting. The guy who developed this we both presented at a conference, and we figured that my student who developed hers was actually born in the year that he published this. So this has been sticking around for 25 years already, this grower metric approach. So it's nothing particularly new, but we do give it a little bit of a different twist. There's also better modeling techniques out here now. So I'll present this new, slightly different approach to you. So it's a continental tool, and it's based on ecosystems. So we can pick an ecosystem as a source and an ecosystem as a target site, and see how seeds should move through the landscape. And so the advantages of this is that it makes computation easy. All the other tools are based on grid cells, 500 meter or 1 kilometer grid cells. That's computationally for the continent is actually quite a bit of work. 22 million rows that you have to deal with all the time. So we can also describe this, at least climatically, very nicely just by ecosystem delineations. And that makes computation easy. It also makes communication easy and recommendations simple. You don't have to say, oh, go from this grid cell, X, Y, and plant it over there. We can just say move species and provenances from an ecosystem that everybody's familiar with to another one to get appropriately adapted genotypes and species in there. And the last advantage is that can be also linked to any polygon. So if you're wondering what goes into your forest management area, we can set that polygon as a target. So you don't necessarily have to deal with complicated models. So this can all be very easily queried. So the principle is simply of climate matching. So we're looking for let's say, target location here. And we have climate values for this. So in this case, that's some place in Virginia, 7.5 degrees roughly, and 1,070 millimeter precipitation or something like this. And now we want to find, let's say we want to plan for the 2080s. Let's be a little bit ambitious. So we need sources that are appropriate in the 2080s. So that should be about 11 degrees, so substantially warmer, and 1,200 millimeters. So it also gets wetter. So we want to find other ecosystems that have these characteristics. And so for every ecosystem, we produce these graphs where you can actually also see the observed climate change in decadal time steps. So the solid line is what's happening from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010, 2020s. 2020s are not complete. That's why this is a little star. But you can see that we are very much on track with the predictions. So you can pull that up for every location in North America. And then what the tool would do, it would find conditions or other ecosystems that match those 2080s conditions. So those happen to be over here, so a little bit further south. And so the recommendation would then to look what species and seed sources are in there, and those would be options for reforestation if you want to plant for the 2080s. You can also plant for the 2020s, since we're already there. That should be very safe, or the 2050s. So this is how this whole interface looks like. So this is our target ecosystem. These are the sources if we want to plant for the 2080s. So you move the slider there. I'll demonstrate this to you in a minute, how that works for Alberta. And it would make suggestions. In this case, these are the seed sources that you should consider. And it also tells you in this table here what's in there and how the species are going to change in their importance under different climates. So, for example, Acer rubrum in this case will decline, but other species like oaks, they will come up. And so you could change your reforestation practices according to this. Now, the species are not directly modeled. We simply compile so these are the ecosystem delineations that we work with. So they are fairly fine scaled. We use level 4 ecological regions in the US and in Canada. And we don't necessarily want to, so we want to recommend what will be suitable habitat. Now, that suitable habitat is implied again by a model, so we don't actually look at what's actually there, but what should be there if the landscape wasn't disturbed by humans. So this is an example for Douglas fir where it would be where it would grow, and so those frequencies tables that you saw on the previous slide, they're based on those projections. And so this is done mostly with deep neural networks. So we first of all, because we don't want to, so if there was no forest, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not suitable climate habitat for trees. So first we reconstruct the landscape, how it would look naturally. So that's the backfilled portion here. So the land cover types, and then we do the same for the species as well to arrive at the species recommendations that would be climatically suitable. And so that tool you can access online. And I'm just going to just switch to a browser here for a moment. So that I can demonstrate this live to you. So I hope you see this. So this is, there are several versions of this tool. So one is for all of North America. But we also have one for Canada and for particular companies that we're working with at the moment to test this. So one of them, so they're across the country. We can just zoom into one, and I'll pick the Blue Ridge FMA, and so the test. They have multiple ecosystems within their FMA. We're just going to look at LF 1.3, Lower Foothills 1.3, because it's an interesting case. So you can set this as your planting site target. And so you get a similar plot as I showed you in the slideshow. So you can see where climate is predicted to go. This is the dashed line. And then you can also see the actually observed climate and decadal intervals. And you see there's a lot more variation in how climate change happens in the real world. But it goes in the right direction, right? So we are spot on for the 2020s where we should be. And you find that actually throughout North America. You can play with that tool and check it out. So the climate models are generally quite correct, even though this is just an average. It just tracks very well where we're actually headed. That has been predicted mostly correctly. And then you can see what that means for the different species suitabilities. So basically green means it's a very suitable habitat. So this will maintain aspen habitat very nicely. Less so for the spruce or pines. So they eventually run out of habitat. But there are interesting things, so some other stuff comes in. So in this case, we have a sugar maple here, Aca saccharum, I think is what that is. And if we look at the at where those come from, we can narrow this now down. So if we were to look where this by the 2080s come from, you can see that close matches are actually from the east, from the Great Lakes regions. So those would be appropriate transfers by the 2080s. So it's maybe a little bit early to test this. So they might still die if you plant them now. But you can also plant for the 2020s, see where those come from. They're from nearby, a little bit further south, or the 2050s. Similarly, so there are actually not very good climate matches by the 2050s. So 0.73 is almost a no analog condition. Generally, if you can get something below 0.5, that's a good match. And anything that's much higher than 1, there may not be analogs, even if you look at any source in North America. So it'll be a little bit uncertain what will actually grow there. So we can't quite do without tests completely. So these can guide us to what we might want to test, and then we'll have to test it now. And in 20, 30 years, we will hopefully know what works. So just to give you another example here, we can also look at the North American tool. So you can either, again, click on any of those points, or you can select them here from the top-down menu. I'm just going to go for, oh, it's not working. Just refresh this. There you go, Alberta. Let's pick a dry mixed wood. Not 1.1. So we're a little bit further north now. That's our target region. And it is important to look at our climate graph here. So this is where we are predicted to go, warmer and wetter. But this is not necessarily where we go. So right now, we're actually going warmer. So the temperature predictions are correct, about 1.5 degree warmer than it used to be. But the precipitation predictions are not correct. So you have to keep that in mind. If that is the case, you might need to have some caution. So general temperature and precipitation are compensating. So in this case, I would actually plant even now for the 2050s, because we don't have the precipitation that was predicted. So all what the tools predict are based on the or what the tools recommend is based on the projections, not necessarily what really happened. So if you have a divergence like this, you have to be a little bit cautious, or just plan for the 2020s. So that's where it's still within the observed range. So let's say we want to plan for the 2050s. So the closest matches are actually coming from down here, quite far down. So it does get a little bit too dry. These are aspen parkland ecosystems. So we can take a look at those. Aspen parkland from down here, that would be an appropriate climate match for temperatures that are expected. And they might even now be appropriate because we also get drier. So that it exacerbates the problem a little bit. So we can select this as a target ecosystems, but before we do so, I just want to point out, so if we were to plan for the 2050s, it should come from a source that is about a little bit more warmer than 2 degrees and around 450 millimeter precipitation. And now let's go there and see what the historic conditions are. Just a little bit warmer than 2 degrees and around a little bit more than 450 millimeter precipitation. So that is what that tool does for you. It picks something with similar climate. And I mean, this is actually done based on 15 biologically relevant variables. So we only show mean annual temperature, mean annual precipitation here in that plot, but there are a bunch more variables that are behind it. So in these two variables, you may not always get 100% match, but it is the best match in multivariate climate space. Good, so that's it. If you want, you can play with this. This is currently where we established test plantations with all those companies and targeting 2050s climate. And then hopefully we will know in 20 years or so what the whether this works or not. That's it.
Thank you, Andreas. That was very interesting and lots of food for thought. We do have a few minutes for questions, so please feel free to put them in the comment in the chat. Also, you can make use of the hands up if you want to, turn your camera on and we've got a hand up from. Oh no, sorry, that was my own my own cursor. I have a question for you, Andreas. If we are shifting the composition of the forest through planting new species of trees, what could the implications of that be then for the larger ecosystem?
We help the ecosystem change. So you really would want, in order to maintain productive and healthy forests, you can't fight climate change. So I think there will be substantial advantages in getting the right species and the right genotypes, introducing them as you reforest, so that those will be appropriately adapted. So I feel that if you don't do that, if you just keep planting what you've been planting, that's not going to work out very well. Yeah. So there will just not be the right species to even maintain the carbon sequestration. And so it's kind of, if I look at Fangliang's projection of how the biomass will increase in the future, right? It actually assumes that you make those transfers. If you don't make them, nobody knows what will happen. So because these are different species, different genotypes, that may not be appropriately adapted to this. So this is implicit in those future projections of maintenance of, or even improvement of biomass and forest productivity, that we have the appropriate species in there.
Oh, but the larger biodiversity complement, the insects and the fungus and all those little pieces of Fangliang's graph that he showed early on.
Yeah, I do have a good answer for this because it's a common question, right? Yeah. And obviously we can migrate the complete ecosystems, and also our footprint in terms of what we can change is very small. We can only do if we're looking at the whole Boreal forest or all of Canada's forest, is, I don't know, maybe 0.5% per year. So basically, the only thing that you can do is give nature a little bit of a help to get the right species and genotypes into position, and then everything else, we'll have to see if that works or not. So all the micro flora and fauna and everything else I don't think we can possibly manage this. So this will be difficult. I think one thing that's important is still that just like now, you match your trees that you plant to the right general habitat conditions. So the advice is always, don't just move it to that ecosystem, no matter. And just like we do it right now, we don't plant species in locations that are not appropriate. So you have to look at the source ecosystem. So where are the species there? Are they in a riparian area? Are they on, special sites? That's that same sort of practice that you do right there, right now. You also have to transfer to the target location. So you still have to match them to the correct sites. And if they are not there, then you can move them. So that's an important piece to keep in mind. But yeah, you can only hope that the all other pieces of the ecosystem will sort of recover or adapt to those new conditions. But I think it's important to have the trees, because we can manage them. We reforest anyway. So that'll be a good starting point, a good seed, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Well, eventually they will form some kind of a symbiosis, but it take a long time.
And it may take a long time.
Not the necessary, those folks who are associated with you and still we move together with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it actually would make sense to inoculate or to actually order.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The distances are actually not
to see how they
necessarily huge everywhere. So there are some instances. I showed you one where the distance is really far, or two examples where they're very far, but many times they're not that far. You can actually purchase planting stock from a nursery that's 200 kilometers further south and plant them there. So that may bring some of some symbiotics that are best adapted as well. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we're just down to a very few minutes, and now the questions are coming in. So
all right, yeah.
we'll take a couple more. And
I'm trying to answer as long as people have questions.
And of course, people are free to get on with their days as they see fit.
You can just knock out, exactly.
Yes. So we have a question for Fangliang.
Yeah.
When increasing density in forests, how do we mitigate against the risk of increased fire severity?
That's a very good question. Density is one aspect of fire. It certainly can contribute to building up the fuel. But to build up the fuel, that's subject to various factors like temperature, drought. For example, 2023, we had so many fires, across all the countries. That was, that's extreme year in terms of fire burns. So since as far as I know, since 1980s, we have never had weather like that in 2023. That's the burn. So yes, I will contribute to the fuel, increase the density, but natural forest, they have the rule. If there's no human interference, they will grow to the line I just show, like a -3/2 ceiling line. That's just regardless what the forest they will grow to a capacity use all the resources.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's a natural process, and then they will be thinning, there will be mortality contribute to the fuel. Now, if you just have the fuel on the ground, that doesn't cause any problem. There's a fire hazard, those ignition, like a lightning or human fires. So that is something, not much we can do at the lightning fires, but we can do a lot in terms of from management perspective to reduce human fires.
Right.
Yeah. So there's, it's a complex issue. There's always, there's all different factors interplay, not just the one factors.
Right. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
We have a question from Susan Frampton of Plane Tree International. She's asking, what support is there from the forestry industry to make the changes needed? I guess that maybe direct that initially to Andreas.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. We presented this in the US earlier this year, and there was not necessarily a response for us, but there were lots of people from the forest industry who presented as well. And there is a very strong demand from the forest industry to do this, especially in the US, where they have breeding programs, because they have to make very long-term investments into seed orchards and things like this, and they don't want to produce seed for another company and pay the money. So there is a very strong interest in getting this right and bringing the correct planting stock and breeding programs into their private seed orchard.
Are you seeing that in terms of either funding or collaboration in your research?
Both, yes. So they are very keen to support this kind of research, and they also do it here, right? So we have that diverse project with this, which is I think on the order of 7 million. That's quite a bit of money to support this kind of research. I should say that what I'm doing as part of this is only a small piece. So there's all other kinds of elements that are covered there as well. But that support is certainly there. And there's also government stakeholders involved. So yeah, it's pretty broad, I think.
Okay, Andrea, before you go, I have a quick question. I guess the audience may have that question as well in mind. So for your program, that's based on niche modeling, or do you have a progeny trial to support the migration, model?
It is not a niche modeling. It is kind of a niche modeling approach, but it's not the standard species.
So you have a progeny trial.
That's no. This is what I presented here. That is not part of it. This will be part of it. So by the time the diverse project is done, the growth projections will be added to that tool as well. So it's both the growth modeling. So not only do you get an idea of which species are appropriate, but also how well they grow based on those.
Okay. Isn't a good way to have some kind of progeny trial?
Sorry, come again?
A progeny trial, whether it's a good way to do some kind of progeny trial.
I think, since you have to wait 20 years to get
that's true.
That is a problem. So this is typically governments that provide this data, and who have done that for a long time. So those trials are, 60, 70 years old, some of them. So this is throughout Canada, these trials have been established already by all jurisdictions a long time ago. So not for the purpose of climate change adaptation, but just to figure out how to get the best growth. So we can now repurpose them to answer some of those questions, how to address climate change. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to leap in here and move us towards closing. Thank you to both of you very much. Great presentations, and as I say, lots of food for thought. I'm going to turn it over to Aisha to bring us to a close. And again, thank you to both of you and to all the people who joined us. Aisha.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Fangliang. And thank you, Dave, for moderating. I appreciate it a lot. The recording of this session will be made available on our website and on YouTube. So if you want that, then just check back in on the Alberta Land Institute website. It'll be within the next 2 weeks. We will be holding more free lunchtime webinar sessions, so also keep an eye out for that. If you are interested in keeping up to date with these, we do have a newsletter, so you can go to our website and sign up to the newsletter from there. And thank you again, everyone, for attending today's session.